Welcome to Star-Powered Astrology for Changemakers. I'm Leslie Tagorda, your guide, a Hawaii-born Filipino-Jewish astrologer who loves navigating visionaries like you through the spiritual journey of your work so that you can be inspired to lead by your chart and become the luminary leader you were born to be. All right. Welcome, luminaries. I'm so excited to bring financial therapist and speaker, Lindsay Bryan-Podvin. Oh my goodness. Lindsay, you do so many things. I love that you are a speaker that helps organizations integrate financial wellness to their employees through workshops, conferences, and trainings. I love that you have your book behind you, the author of Financial Anxiety. Love your podcast and your YouTube channel, Mind Money Balance. Love that you are a sister biracial Filipina, and love that you're Virgo, Sun, Pisces, Moon, Scorpio rising. Everybody, welcome my friend, my colleague, Lindsay Bryan-Podvin. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi, it is so good to be here. And not only do I have my book behind me, your book is over
Oh,
as well. I'm like trying to point behind me. But yes, I love it.
oh my goodness. So Lindsay and I have been working on this a side project, a design project, and we've been chatting about money and deserving and worthiness. And we have this lunar eclipse coming up. And I was like, Lindsay, let's talk about this because you've been sharing a little bit of like money trauma and kind of your visibility journey and how that's all tied into this idea of worthiness. And I was like, this Scorpio, this over the Taurus lunar eclipse that we have is all about this. So I'm so glad that you decided to join and let's talk about money and deserving.
Yes. Let's do it. Let's dive in.
Yeah. So I have a question. So you've worked with so many clients on their money stories, their money trauma, and how would you define deserving?
I'm so glad you asked this because I think I will slip into using deserving and worthiness as synonyms, but they're a little bit different. And as I sat with this question as we come up on this eclipse, deserving to me, when I really sit with it, is much more meritocracy based. It is this idea that you get the thing once you have done a task that demonstrates that you are allowed to rest or have money or have success. Whereas worthiness is just something that we all inherently have. We don't have to hit a six-figure year in order to be worthy. We don't have to be full-time private small business owners to be worthy. Worthiness is just who we are. And I think, especially in the online business space, there's been this idea when it comes to money of charge your worth, just charge your worth. And I think it's so, I get the sentiment behind it, but when we think about that, that is telling somebody to put a number on something that is impossible to associate a number with. So it's so much better to add a little bit of disclaimer there, which might sound like charge the value of the work that you provide or charge for the value of the services that you give. So I was supposed to answer deservingness, but I slid into worthiness because it's been on
No.
my mind a lot.
Yeah, I absolutely loved how you define both deserving and worthiness. And I feel like spending a little bit of time in this idea of meritocracy and having to earn your worthiness, which is that deserving part, is so important because I know at least with this last eclipse that we have, we're recording this right in the middle of our two like intense eclipses.
Oh, yeah.
We're feeling the global shakeups. We're not going to talk about that here now. um, but what we are talking about in this deserving, like these, at least from a Libra perspective, because that was the last eclipse, when I was going through all of the things, the relationship power dynamics that we needed to let go, they all came from this deserving place, like servitude, obligation, overworking, like all of these things that we were doing because we didn't feel worthy.
Yes, exactly. And so many of us fall into that trap of feeling like we have to work more or sell more or whatever the case may be in order to be worthy of things like rest and success and downtime and things like that.
Ooh, so this really brings up a really cool, like I'm visualizing this new exercise, this new assessment of how we
Mhm.
can figure out in our businesses if we're operating from this place of deserving or operating from this place of worth.
Yes. Oh my gosh, what just came to mind based on, some recent themes that have been coming up is this idea that deservingness, if it's rooted in meritocracy, is also rooted in some of the exploitative parts of capitalism. So then worthiness, on the other hand, is something that we as sentient beings have available to us no matter what. That would be the the exchange of money, the currency flow, the healthy parts of a community where money is a part of the exchange, but
Yeah.
it isn't tied to the exploitation.
Yes. Oh my goodness. We are totally onto something here. I think because we're both Filipina, like we've been doing
Hmm.
so much work in terms of like decolonizing our mindset and how that
Yeah.
exploitation, especially of Filipina bodies and labor,
Mm,
is rampant, and how those intergenerational stories,
yeah.
especially from our grandparents, our great grandparents, the Philippines having been colonized for over 500 years, how that's so like woven into like, okay, you have to like, you got to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, or you have to be a nurse, you have to provide for your family, you have to have a real
Hmm.
job, you have to like share all your money, all of this kind of deserving and exploitation of all these like money mindsets. But when you're talking about that worth, and what I think both of us are trying to build in this kind of equitable and changing these systems, is really the exchange and the contribution of
Yes.
value,
Yes.
and
Yes.
seeing your value for what that unique gift is, not because you're a doctor or a lawyer or accredited of all these things, but simply because you are generous and helping people transform.
Yes, yes. Ooh, yeah, we're vibing today, as the kids say.
Do we have the Riz?
Yeah. Somebody just shut that off under the age of 28. They're like, I'm out of here. But for everybody else, stay. It's a good conversation.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have to know like what everybody's saying. I feel like being in this middle age place, like I really want to know what the young people are saying. I still want
Totally.
to be connected to all of those. I want it all, right? So
Hmm.
anyway, so let's come back to this idea of
Yeah.
deserving versus worthy. How have you seen it show up in people's businesses? Because you
Ooh.
work with entrepreneurs as well,
Yes.
right?
Yes, absolutely. So when I think about this deserving and worthiness discussion, I also think, before we went live, we talked about this idea of trauma. And I think to answer the question about deserving and
Yeah.
worthiness, it'd be helpful to just set the stage of how financial trauma also shows up in entrepreneurs' lives.
Whew, okay, let's set this up. Okay, everybody.
Yeah. Everyone, ground yourself.
Yes, I had to put my feet in the ground and sit up a little bit straighter
Yeah.
because I'm like, okay, we're gonna have some real talk here. Let's
Yeah.
take this all in without like with calming our nervous system down a little bit. Here we go. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, I
Okay.
know. I've got my dog on my feet, which is super helpful for this moment. So, money trauma is a cluster of physiological, so in our body or somatic, mental, and emotional responses to any sort of one time event or series of events where our financial livelihood was threatened. So, money trauma could be something like systemic poverty, or it could be an acute one time financial stressor, such as a breakup or a divorce. Now, the reality is, most of us will experience some sort of financial trauma throughout our life. And in particular, with our business owners, this can show up all the time. Those different wounds can show up. And when we, for a variety of reasons, respond to it in the to use some of the astro language, to use the shadow side of how we might respond to this event, we may do things like avoid our finances, procrastinate on raising our rates. We might hoard our Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, keep on going. I'm just raising my hand to all the things that I've done as you're listing them.
Yeah, yeah. So we might hoard our resources and not spend. We may, on the other hand, we might overspend. We may find ourselves in codependent or unhealthy relationships, or we might, as a part of this avoidance, we might spend money on things when our business isn't ready to support that outsourcing. So hiring a VA or hiring somebody to do amazing marketing and branding when you aren't quite ready. So to set the stage there, then we think about this idea of worthiness and deservingness. If I think about my clients who've experienced financial trauma, it makes perfect sense to me that they may fall into some of these shadow side behaviors after experiencing financial trauma to try and prove that they deserve the things that they're inherently worthy of.
Oof. Oh my goodness. So I can see these traumas happening for almost all of us, right?
Yes,
Especially
absolutely.
if we identify as women, because
Mm-hmm.
for many generations in the United States, we've always been codependent on
Mm-hmm.
men for earning money,
Mm-hmm.
right? No matter what your race is. And then for those of us who identify as BIPOC folk, I mean, the money trauma is intergenerational.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think it's really important to name that money trauma is intergenerational. We know the research shows that our trauma is passed on between 5 and 7 generations. So even if I didn't experience financial insecurity, but my grandparents did, it makes perfect sense that I would respond to the fear or the threat of financial insecurity in the way that my grandparents may have, or my great or great grandparents may have. So I think it's really important that for a person who maybe says, well, I come from financial privilege, I'm raising my hand here, Leslie, you know this, or for a person who said, we were solidly middle class, we never had to worry about whether or not we'd have food or shelter or clothing, but we did struggle in other ways. I don't get why I have such an overspending problem or such a problem hoarding my resources. We might then be able to go out to, yes, the systems that we're in right now, but also what was your family lineage like when it came to financial trauma?
Oof, I have it all, right?
Yeah, right,
I-
right.
I've only recently mentioned, like in the last few years, have come out as being of Jewish heritage. My mom was Jewish, my
Mm,
grandmother was Jewish, my great grandmother was Jewish, and they survived the Holocaust, right?
yeah.
And
Mm,
so thinking about when they were back in the homeland in Eastern Europe, they had everything taken away from them.
yeah.
Like they survived with just like one heirloom ring that I still have that I cherish, and had to rebuild over and over again. But they had that tenacity. And then on my
Mm,
Filipino side, my grandmother, they left the Philippines because of poverty, of just
yeah.
being in the mountains and not having any resources because of like the Spaniards had everything, right? And
Yeah.
so there's all of these like multiple layers. Yet I know that growing up solidly middle class like you, I'm still, I've worked through some of my money wounds, but
Mm,
they're still there. Like the
absolutely.
ups and downs of entrepreneurship, of not having like a regular cash flow. So how do you build sustainability and consistency out of that? Like Megan Hill like really helped me with her
Mm-hmm,
systems and that.
mm-hmm.
But still there's like, you have your tax allocations growing, and then tax season happens and you're like, I'm broke.
Yes, yes, exactly. We have these literal lineages, and then we have how it shows up in our business, and it makes sense why our responses to these ups and downs in entrepreneurship may seem large for what they are, right? We would say, to use psychology language, we would say the response was inappropriate to the scenario, right? It's a big response. But when we think about it with that compassion and with that empathy and with that insight, that our ancestors had to hold on tightly to the things that they had, and only the belongings that they could carry, it makes perfect sense why we would be fearful in this moment if our resources, which in today's day and age is largely financial, are threatened.
Yeah. And if we can simply hold that spot in our hearts to remember that we are here because our ancestors were
Yes.
tenacious and they
Yes.
rebuilt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that the abundance can be infinite,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So when we think, because like our conversation is still ultimately about this lunar eclipse, this
Mm-hmm.
Taurus lunar
Mm-hmm.
eclipse, and I've had people in my communities ask me, well, how do we unlock this financial
Mm.
trauma?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, can we talk about that in like 10 minutes? Like, can you just like give us the magic
Yeah.
key?
Yes. Let me just give you the mantra and the exact spell, and we'll all be on our
We'll like
way.
snap it into
Yes.
existence.
Yes, exactly. So I would say two things come to mind when we think about what's the key to moving through trauma, because the reality is we don't erase it, right? It is
Mm,
embedded in our genes when we look at that side of things. And we also know just somatically it's in our minds and it's in our hearts. So, first, I would say, acknowledging that the patterns or the behaviors that you are in or you're repeating, even if they are the shadow side, you're procrastinating or underspending or overspending, those in some way were designed to keep you safe. So, for example, if you come from a lineage where you had to trust somebody else in order to be financially safe or physically safe, it would make sense that you might defer to other people and outsource really quickly as a way of keeping safe. So, first, we want to acknowledge we're doing what we're doing because we learned it as a safety mechanism rather than blaming ourselves, shoulda, woulda, coulda. The reality is, we do what we do because at some point in time, it served us to help us survive. So, that's part one. And then part two is that there is a beautiful part of that resilience that you mentioned, and it is called post traumatic growth. And the research says that for many people who experience financial trauma, yes, many people will experience some of those patterns or behaviors of the shadow side of having that experience, but so many more of us are actually likely to experience this post traumatic resiliency. And so I'll read out the things that can happen: greater appreciation of life, greater appreciation of and strengthening your relationships that matter, increased compassion, right? The
mm,
capacity to feel for others and ourselves, the identification of a new or renewed purpose in life,
mm.
greater awareness of personal strengths, creative growth, and enhanced spiritual growth. Yeah.
Is so beautiful. Do you
Yeah.
have like, can you make a poster of that or
I would
something?
love to. Yeah,
We'll
yeah,
put it in
yeah.
your new brand.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. I think it's so helpful to remember that, yes, we are. I love when I hear you say on your podcast, it's the both and. And that to me is really possible here when we think about trauma. Obviously, none of us wants to experience trauma, nor do we wish it upon anyone. And the reality is, the way that the world is, we will experience some form of trauma in our lives. And in particular, when the bulk of our resources are tied to our finances, we will experience financial trauma. So, yes, we may fall into some unhealthy behaviors, but we also have this amazing capacity for growth.
Can we go back to that first step that you mentioned about
Yes,
unlocking
yes,
financial trauma?
yes,
Because I want you to recap what that is for us to assess, especially if we're operating in several different
yes,
symptoms of that financial trauma,
yes,
right? I'm
yes.
sure that a lot of us here are operating and maybe undercharging or not being
Mm,
able to keep money or having just like really financial
yes,
insecurity.
yes.
How do we manage when it's so tangled up?
Great question. So let me give a few more examples of how that financial trauma might show up and how to move through it with compassion. So, the example of undercharging. If I'm an entrepreneur who's undercharging, what is the reason that undercharging kept me safe financially, or I thought it would keep me safe financially? We may go, oh, if I undercharge, then more people will be able to afford it and more people will be able to buy it. And therefore, it's actually a great way of me staying safe, right? I'm a psychotherapist. So, in the way that this shows up a lot is my therapist friends say, oh, I have to take insurance because that will help other people be able to afford me, even though the reimbursement rates are terrible, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we can say it makes sense that I want to keep my rates low because I think that keeping my rates low will mean accessibility. And if I raise my rates, I trust that when I am financially compensated for more than just survival, I will be able to go above and beyond in the value that I'm delivering. So we honor where we came from and we move into a more helpful and healthy and loving new way of thinking.
Mm. So we get to the root of what we're thinking. We
Mm-hmm.
give it some loving compassion.
Mm-hmm.
We basically say, is this the truth or is this a limiting self belief?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can start to make better decisions.
Yes, 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 exactly. So the same, I said I would give another example. So let's say that's not you. Let's say you are a spender and that's the way that your financial trauma has manifested. We get to ask ourselves, why does spending more than I'm earning in my business help me feel safe? And then we can kind of figure out where that might come from. We might go, oh, when I spend on all of these different services, that is a way of expanding my community. So maybe that is what I'm craving. And so then we can go, okay, how can I pull back on my spending without kind of without burning bridges or impacting my community? And we can say something like, it makes sense that I spend as a way to try and nurture my community. I'm learning to invest in relationships that matter, that may involve purchasing their goods or services over time. But at this season in my business, I don't have to spend money to build community, right? It can be something like that as well.
We'll have to do another episode on this because there's definitely in our natal charts an investment key, and it's not just Venus.
Oh my gosh, love it.
It has to do with a little bit of the safety of the moon, right? These
Yeah.
questions that we're asking, I think that was the podcast episode we did on
Yeah.
your podcast about how do we use our moon signs so we can feel
Yes.
safe
Yes.
to get to some of these the underbelly of why we think we're doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. So this was so valuable, Lindsay. Thank you for sharing with us like really two easy actionable steps to unlock our financial trauma, one based on compassionate understanding and then looking at the result of our post-traumatic growth and what we're
Yes.
really here. Um, do you mind if we talk a little bit of this eclipse, the
Please.
astrology? Because of course, in the eclipse, when I'm looking at just kind of like how the stars are designed or how the planets are arranged, I always feel like there's like an energy, a question that is being asked of us to like really, really harness. And so this eclipse that we have, it's a full moon partial eclipse. So when we have a full moon, it's always a lunar eclipse. This is a partial eclipse, so it's not going to turn that like deep red. And it happens on the 28th. I believe that's, I should know what date that is. What date
I
did we
think
do?
that's a Saturday or is that a Friday?
Yeah, you're right. It's Saturday.
Yes. Yes.
So 1:24 p.m. Pacific, 4:24 p.m. Eastern. And I've been calling this moon, I label these the names of them like, at the beginning of the year. And I labeled this leaving scarcity behind. Okay. So tell me if you agree with this. And so full moons, these lunar eclipses are like full moons that are kind of on steroids. And eclipse seasons, of course, are renowned for shaking things up and throwing wild cards into the mix and revealing all the layers of reality that you are meant to resolve over the next 6 months. And so this Taurus lunar eclipse is ripe with all these planetary face-offs. We'll talk about those individually and asking all of us to make bold choices that continue on letting go of things that we don't need. For Taurus, letting go of scarcity mindsets and lack that still permeate in our life and our work. But maybe as we've been having this discussion, this lack really comes from the lack that's created from deserving.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I
Right.
think it makes perfect sense.
And so, one of the things that's really intense about this particular eclipse is that Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio, and it's a Taurus Scorpio sun, Taurus moon. Pluto is one of the rulers of Scorpio, and Pluto is about death and rebirth. And on the day of this full moon, Pluto changes from retrograde to direct. Okay. And anytime Pluto makes a change, it feels like, whoa, intense, especially for those who have like any aspects. And so to me, Pluto is asking, what truths are now brought to light that you're able to transform? And the truths are always based around fear and shame that hold you back. And so maybe Pluto is asking about our money shames.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense to spend this time really looking at, without judgment, what are those money fears? What is coming up when it comes to scarcity? And how can you lovingly honor where it came from and say or release that that particular way of dealing with this financial scarcity is no longer working and no longer needed.
No longer needed.
Mm,
We can say bye-bye.
yes.
Okay, so Pluto, we're throwing all away, we're composting back all of our shames around money because we are going to turn them into our post-traumatic growth. Okay, so now also this moon is exactly in between Jupiter and the North Node. Okay, Aries North Node and Jupiter. North Node is about collective, us moving into our highest potential. Jupiter is about expanding our gratitude, expanding our potential, and exceeding our expectations. And it's still in Taurus. So this is about money and worthiness expectations, right? So to me, this moon being the eclipse moon is somehow saying, you are emotionally ready to bridge the gap between your highest potential and your worthiness. What do you take? What is your take on being emotionally ready to bridge the gap between your highest potential and your worthiness?
Well, as I think about bridging the gap between the emotional capacity to reach your highest worthiness, and I know as an avid listener of you and your work, if we're thinking about the themes of Taurus and thinking about safety and security, I'm also thinking that to bridge the gap, we can look to what helps me to feel safe and what are the things that I can release from helping me to feel safe. And in this particular instance of leaving financial scarcity behind to build up that emotional resilience, I think some of the tips that I mentioned earlier really just fit into this theme of I trust myself enough, I trust my community enough, I trust my offers and my services enough to not have to rely on those old trauma responses.
Ooh, so good. I feel like our the what we've provided is like really answering these questions.
Yeah.
I write these questions again like so long ago, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is really good. So there's another aspect between Jupiter sitting across a Scorpio, Mercury, and Mars, and Mercury and Mars are conjunct. And so when we have these oppositions, I always like to think of them as a choice. Like we have to decide. And so when I think about Jupiter, Mercury, and Mars, the question is, how will you choose to take strategic action and understanding on growing your sustainable wealth?
Oh, that's so good, Leslie.
And so thinking, I mean, just like when we're like presenting those questions about unlocking your financial deserving. So Lindsay, how do you recommend people take strategic action so that they can start building their sustainable wealth?
One of my favorite things to do is to take the smallest next step you have to take. And what this does is allows us to start trusting ourselves and say, oh, I am able to do the thing that I might have been fearful of. And that can help to create this nice momentum as you are making the choice to leave some of the scarcity behind.
Mm. That feels really good. I'm trying to think what is going to be like my one easy step.
Mhm.
We just did our retreat and did so much planning. Whenever I put those profit projections up, they still scare me.
Yeah.
I'm like, how am I going to do that? So I'll have to
Yeah.
sit with that a little bit. Okay, last question. So this Pluto that's now stationed, stopped in the sky, changing direction, is squaring off with the sun in Scorpio. Yes, in Scorpio. And when we have this kind of square, to me, this is really about that inner integration, that inner understanding, that inner acceptance, and the intrinsic action. And so I suspect that our listeners are like, yes, there's something that they just are not avoiding anymore, that they really, really, really want to take that next action. And so I guess it kind of goes back to that previous question, but is there anything else that you can add now that we have this intrinsic fire to want to make change to our money wounds?
Yeah, I think what's coming up is a couple of those key tenets or those key things that we see happen in this post-traumatic growth, which is this greater awareness and capacity to use your own strengths and also the ability to trust new possibilities in life. So I think those two things are speaking to me as we think about this piece.
Ooh, I love it. So, for those of us who know our astrology charts, remember to go back to your moon sign because your moon sign will tell you what you need to create emotional safety, to feel secure. And even though we're not really talking about Venus so much, Venus is our one of our attraction keys. She simply directs the attraction. So, looking at where Libra and where Taurus is, but also just, for simplicity's sake, for here and now, look to your Venus sign and see what some of your strengths are in attracting. So I have a Capricorn strength, Capricorn Venus. So I know that just my own expertise, my own tenacity is going to be my strength. Oh, of course, Lindsay, your Venus is in Scorpio.
Oh.
So it's
Okay.
your trust in yourself and your power
Mm,
and your intuition and that magnetism,
mm,
right?
yeah.
And so if any of us have those air Venuses, some of your connection strengths is your community. So lean on your people, like make those invitations. For those air Venuses, some of your connection and your valuable strengths are around your intellect and sharing information, right? Creating information. And then for those earth Venuses, of course, it's your practicality. You're gonna get it done. And then those fire Venuses, it's your trend setting, your inspiration, and your creativity. So, know that your Venus will give you a key to your ability to connect and attract what is yours. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. We'll have to have a deeper conversation on that later.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
So, my friends, on social media, I'll have some more reflections for this lunar eclipse based on your house. So make sure to check me out on Instagram at BStarPowered to get some personalizations. And Lindsay, please let us know where people can. If do you have first of all, do you have any last thoughts that you want to share with us before sharing what you have going on and how people can get connected with you?
I'm just so thrilled to be in community with you and to be able to have this space to talk about some of these things that I think feel so scary, right? When we think about money, when we think about trauma, when we think about worthiness, and to be held in a space where it's okay to talk about this stuff. And I just am so honored. And in terms of what's going on and how people can find me, Leslie knows I'm at a point of expansion. In these last 6 months, I've been going back and forth and back and forth. And this eclipse is going to be super important for me because it's shedding those last few layers so that I
Yes.
can really expand into being able to disseminate my beliefs around financial wellness holistically and how it intersects with our mental health. And you can find me pretty much everywhere under the Mind Money Balance brand on YouTube, Instagram, my podcast, or website.
Oh my goodness. Lindsay, thank you so much for joining in on this conversation. I feel like this is one we'll have to do again.
This was such a treat.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. And everybody, we'll talk to you soon. Have a blessed solar. Oh my gosh. Have a blessed lunar eclipse. As a human design projector, my energy shines more brightly because of people like you who share my work. If you enjoy this podcast and want to help build a movement of innovative astrology and leadership and spark the intuitive revolution, please rate and review this podcast on Apple Podcasts, or better yet, share this podcast with your change-making besties. We will all shine brighter together as we create the future we